Hello, everyone. This is James Daniel, and I don't know what the hell the date is today. I haven't been paying much attention except that Friday, July 25th. Okay, here we go. I want to do I didn't invite anybody to join us today, which doesn't mean no one will. Sometimes we sneak in because this is live after all, and it does give them notifications that suddenly some lunatic went live from the Love Foundry. So, but here's why. I'm talking about making the invisible visible. How does that become? How do we grow into greater depths of consciousness when it's invisible to us? We have to have a procedure and a process in which that happens. Now, of course, it is a process, a posture, an application of a formula inside of a human consciousness, us, that makes that happen. And everybody does it. You already are doing it. Every mother's doing it because they're imagining their children growing up. They aren't there yet. We don't know what they're going to turn into. But a mother has a hope that they will grow up and become conscious of the inner God that's in them, the great spiritual being that's in them, the great love that lies in the ocean of reality inside every child. Every child has it. Every mother knows it. Every mother wants it for their child. So they serve that invisible culture inside of us, hoping we will latch onto it and pull it into our conscious life, our daily life, and make it real in our outer life through experience and demonstration. And everyone does, by the way, to a degree. Now, sometimes the necessities of karma put mountain ranges between us and that inner freedom. Why karma does that, why the lords of karma do it, why that's constructed for us is for one reason and one reason only: to give us the adequate lessons by living through that experience that will allow us to do that very same thing, because we don't know how to access it without making mistakes. And it's those mistakes that we make in our past that demonstrate to the law of karma, the lords of karma, the energy, the living energy of love that is karma, that cause it to respond by producing a set of circumstances which will give us the lesson we demonstrated a lack of in the past. It's an automatic device. It's fabulous. It works perfectly. It's not always convenient when we're on our way to get yogurt ice cream and somebody runs this into us in the intersection and we have a fender bender and we say, why the hell did that have to happen to me? I wanted to go get some yogurt. Well, that's life giving you something to step over on the way because you demonstrated by past choice that you need it. Now, what it is, why it is, how it is, that comes through working our way through the fender bender on the way to yogurt. Sometimes it's fatal, and that yogurt will have to wait for the next opportunity in some far distant future, and hopefully yogurt will still be around. Or we'll have bobas or something better than yogurt that we can choose. I didn't design that system. At least I don't remember designing it. So I can't complain about it because evolution proceeds. And it's one of the levers of evolution that everyone lives with. Everyone, everything. Planets have karma. Lives have karma of every size and dimension in the universe. So it's not that one size fits all. It's that one size adapts to all. whatever the consciousness is of the being that's roaming around in a human skin, in a other kind of skin, angelic skin, planetary skin, whatever it is, its karma is adjusted to their size and space. But this is about not how you overcome karma. You do that by facing it, accepting the responsibility of it, because it's in your life. What did I do to put that in my life? That's the right approach to karma, because there's no other way it gets into our lives except by our own actions in the past. Now, karma can be fast, as John Lennon says, instant karma comes. Instant karma can be here because time is sort of a illusion. But it comes out of past action, creating the necessity for forward action. Now, how do you transform karma, negate karma, undo karma? Well, it's not easy. It's not a jail you can pick your way out of with a bobby pin. Even love itself, which while it will undo karma by action, by right action, isn't an instantaneous fix. Because when we engage in something that creates the necessity for a future karmic action, it's something that involved not just us, but others who may have been inconvenienced, so to speak, which is not exactly the right word, but they have been actively interacted with during whatever choice we made, creating that karma. So fixing you is not the issue of karma. It's balancing every life that was entered into the contract. So it's too big a subject to cover at this moment because I'm actually not looking at karma. I'm just reminding you that don't think that something doesn't apply simply because the laws of karma create a difficulty for you to have it. Yes, and you look at the world, it's interacting with its own past, which is everything going on. Russia, Ukraine, the Jews and the Iranians and the Chinese, with everybody and themselves, all of this interaction going on that's creating difficulty for the people involved is based on their past. What they're bringing from their past into their present that is not love is creating more of the same stuff that they made a mistake with in the past. In other words, you can't bomb your way out of war. It just doesn't work. So setting that activity aside for the moment, that's karma producing, that we all have to learn how to live within. I mean, can you live without creating karma? Yes. Yes, you could. I'm not saying you can, but you could. And it's challenging. And it means being in harmony with love in your creative actions. And kick a rock down the street, kick the can down the street. That's an action. So whatever action we choose to manifest in the physical world, making it karma free means filling it with, consciously, in the human case, consciously filling it with love. Now, so that brings me back around to the subject of today, which is making the invisible visible, as a mother's striving to do with her child, as an architect is striving to do with his bridge. He wants to build a bridge, so he starts with a drawing of the bridge. He starts with an idea of the bridge. He starts with measurements. He starts with calculations. He gets an engineer to help him, and they sit down and figure out how are we going to get from here to here with something that will suspend itself in the world of gravity, and we can drive big trucks over it, and it will last there for 100 years or longer. Some bridges have been up for a long, long time. And it's not just about materials. The Romans built some bridges that still stand. They knew how to put one stone against another in a way that created the Roman arch. And you could put a lot of weight on the Roman arch if your foundations were not going to shift and if your stone was strong. Because science doesn't lie. The angle that transfers the weight around the arch down to the foundation, if they're all met accurately, you can build a pretty damn good arch. And then we created the Gothic arch, which goes like this. And cathedrals start rising into the sky with these beautiful points that transfer the weight pushing down on them in this beautiful arch out like that and then to the ground. And it's just another way of construction. But you have to visualize and imagine it before it could be built. There was no arch, the two hands praying that builds the cathedrals of the Renaissance era and the great seer architects of that era. That idea of that kind of an arch, while it might exist in nature, there's nature building stuff that's comes right out of the heart of God, right out of the mind of God. You know, Velcro was borrowed from the plant kingdom, as a lot of other inventions have been. So it's there in nature, or we couldn't perceive it and receive it. It doesn't have to be physically manifest, but it's invisible to us, to the eyes, to the brain that looks around the world. But somebody in the Renaissance era looking for a way to bring consciousness and the invisible and the nature of love and the nature of greater architecture into human expression saw this idea. Now, where they were looking that they saw it, I don't know. There is considered the hall of learning, the hall of wisdom in the ethereal planes is considered to be a reality built in etheric substance as a living expression of a greater conscious being, that if you see it, you would see that architecture, but it had never been perceived and brought down into human construction terms up to that moment. Now, that to know that that's true, you'd have to see the hall of learning. That's invisible too to the human eye of the normal and average person. But there are people who have been there and remember it and say, my God, what kind of a place was that? Was that a dream? No, it wasn't a dream. It was a place that you were in a subtle level of consciousness where things exist that don't have physical appearances until we build churches that look like that. And it's not that in physical form, but it sort of is that in physical form because we've patterned the great cathedrals of the Renaissance period and some after upon that reality. But that reality does not just condense itself into the material world, except through the imagination and visualization of human beings, which is how we build a greater and greater world around us by seeing a more subtle world and figuring out how to apply techniques and substances. The difficulty we're having now with microchips that are 2 microns thick and have 100 billion transistors in a little tiny frickin' microchip. The trouble with those things is that they're pieces of art. They're creations made entirely by machines based on some human visualization and imagination of how it has to be done and how it can work and how to hook it up to electricity and actually process through it. So it's a very exotic area of human consciousness that a certain amount of engineers can think in, can imagine it, can have conversations with each other about, talking about silicon and graphene and whether or not we can go to photons instead of electrons because electrons are too big and clumsy. And if we go to photons, we can flow those through all these billions of transistors. And then they go, well, we wouldn't use a transistor if we're going to use a photon. We use a photonic transistor, which is a different kind of thing. So all of this is advancing, but it's advancing towards something that already exists because photons are everywhere in the universe, flooding all over the place, following laws that govern them. Now, I'm kind of bouncing around. So you get the idea that the invisible, while it isn't able to be seen easily, already exists. All the dead people exist. Where do they exist? What bodies are they in? What does their environment look like? How do we relate to that with our own inner self, our own future self that will be dead as far as a physical body? That's something we don't know yet, but we're not going to invent it. We're going to perceive it. We're going to see how it already works. And if you want to think about it logically, just like the Gothic cathedrals, we will not only see it, we will realize it, we will communicate with it, we will interact with it, we will turn the human race into a fully conscious walking meat suit that can not only imagine into that world where all of that exists, but integrate it conveniently with the physical manifestation that we're already walking around in. And when we do that, when that happens to the human race, which is already happening now, love will come into the world. The energy of love is a free-flowing reality in those subtle worlds. But love itself is invisible to us. We can see the effect of it. Pet your dog on the head and its tail wags. That's not just emotion, good dog spot. It's actually an exchange of the energy of love between a human and its animal friend that it responds to and you respond to because you wanted to pet it and it was happy to receive it. And yet the love itself was invisible. All we saw were the effects. And great art, which this behind me is not necessarily great art, but it is art of a kind. It is a representation of love manifesting in an invisible world. And there's spiritual art, and there's all kinds of, I think, a pause, because I think all art to a degree is spiritual, because beauty is manifested through the interaction of love with the material world and spirit, of course. So the question is, how do we make the invisible visible in a focused way? And what's the logical approach we should probably take if we're going to do that? Now, if you're an artist like Salvador Dali and you're going to paint melted watches, you're going to paint how things look in some inner world where things are not exactly the same as they are in the material world. He's focused on that, and he's not focused in it as someone who wants to be that art, wants to be that watch, wants to be the cathedral that he's visualizing. He wants to just show it. He wants to represent it. And he himself doesn't have to have any particular spiritual qualities in order to do that, which a lot of the Renaissance artists of the 14 and 15, 1600s, some of them were reprehensible people from our point of view. From themselves, they were just partying a little heavy. But they weren't striving to manifest that. They were striving to see it and to create it in oil paintings or in sculpture or in some other medium. Now, today, we have artists that are preparing to demonstrate some deeply invisible, magnificent spiritual art, a reality on inner planes of subtle energy through themselves in the form of music. Beethoven did that for his epic period of time. But now we're talking about popular musicians expressing the reality of the coming Aquarian age, which it may be out there in the future to people who look at it and say, well, are we in the Aquarian age yet? Well, we're just coming out of Pisces. We're just entering into it. We're kind of in the overflow. We're getting there. We're getting there. But the Aquarian age is a region like a dinner plate. It's a dinner plate through which our solar system is rowing its way through right now. It's entering into, because the Piscean area of space that's very focused area of that dinner plate, 1/12 of the dinner plate, 8 something degrees or something of that dinner plate is regarded as Pisces. But the front end of it and the back end of it spill over into the two adjacent zodiacal areas of impression. So it's overflowing because it's energy. It doesn't have a defined. Now there are three decants. They call them decants in the movement through astrological spaces. If you're going around this circle up here, that's why these mandalas have these different regional, see these different regional zones in this thing? That means that each one of those is under the influence of in a different way from the one adjacent to it. But all of them in the whole circle are created by a certain type of energy. And there are various manifestations because of the influences of the things that happen in that little square. Sorry, me pointing at that doesn't really help you very much. This is what makes weather people fabulous. They are able to look at you and talk to you and go around that little square because they're looking at a screen. So, as Earth and its solar system, the whole bunch of us, all of us together, Jupiter, Uranus, we're all moving through the same region of space together, but not all at the same time, because the front end of the solar system, which as we go around the sun, if this is the sun, then we're Earth, which is a third planet out, which would be 1, 2, 3. That would be us. So you see, that's why these things kind of represent a solar magnitude. And this out here might represent the backdrop of stars beyond the solar system of which we are a part. And so, in a sense, it's all one dinner plate moving around a greater dinner plate. And so the front end of our solar system is cutting into that space. And it might take a while before the front edge of the dinner plate over here out there, well, sorry about all that, out here on that edge, I don't need to get that big with my finger, out here on the edge, it's going to take a while before it gets to the center where the sun is. This little circle in the middle might be the sun. So how far is it from out here where the asteroid belt is, where Pluto is, where Uranus is, and Neptune and all those other guys, Saturn out there somewhere? These are all way out there from the heart of the sun. But because that's the front edge, the solar system itself is entering into the Aquarian space. Now, the three decants are the first third, the middle third, and the last third. And they're governed by different qualities of energy, depending on who you are entering into it. The universe is a complex energy field. And while love is everywhere in it, it's invisible to us in the material density because it doesn't show up in matter as something you can see in it. You can look at the rainbow and you realize those colors are in the sky because of sunlight being refracted through water. It went through a little tiny prism, and all those billions of little prisms that are in the sky made up this incredible singular rainbow. It's a pretty amazing thing to have happen. But there it is, and it's only there temporarily, and then it's gone. So even those colors that are in the sky, in the sunlight hitting the earth, all those colors are in the sunlight, which itself, when you look at the sky, is invisible. Like water's invisible to a fish. It's just what it's in. So love is invisible to us. But in the inner worlds where love is the daily conscious companion to the beings that live there, it's more visible. It's still invisible because it's illumination. Oh, look, there's that beautiful golden color of love. No, that's not the color of love. That's the color of love passing through the body of a vast angelic being that makes up this entire space that we're in right now. Because space is alive. And the body of that living thing responds to all the energies of the universe in certain ways. But the material space, what surrounds the earth that we see when we look up to the moon, that doesn't reflect love in its body in a way that lights up like a neon light. So we don't see the color of love. We see a sort of version of it in a rainbow, maybe, because it's there everywhere. So we want to know how to make love a active, dynamic product of our life. Now, gravity doesn't need you to do that. Jump off a cliff, whether you believe in gravity or not, whether you can see it or not, whether you think it's real or not, you're going down unless you're lighter than air. So that's how it happens. Love is here and it's active and it's doing things that we're not aware of. But human beings are little solar systems in themselves. And when we become conscious of the energy of love, that aspect of life that is what we call love, which is just a part of the nature of life itself that we can't really define in its true character because it's just too immense and it has too many interactive properties at too many levels. So we give it the name love because that's how it comes to us. That's how it came down to us. So in order for us to make that a conscious, cooperating energy in our lives, which makes every human being, in a sense, a beginning of a godlike being, a God of love. Now, when we think of Jesus as a being who chose to allow love into him, as happened at his baptism with John, in case you're not aware of the Jesus story, it is a well-told story about how this guy shows up to be baptized by his friend, and his friend baptizes him. And a baptism is a way of connecting you to a level of energy in the universe that has a purifying power in it and is one of the manifestations of love. Now, John may not have known all of that because he was a Jewish lad who's striving to bring a higher quality of life to the Jewish culture by bringing people into the Jewish religion, which pays homage to the creator of all things, which was their idea of Jehovah or Yahweh or somebody like that they were thinking in those terms. But love has its own ideas about what to do and when to do it. So the sincerity of commitment of Jesus to allow himself to be brought into the positive idea that John was enacting, which is based on ancient tradition and reverent respect. So, as is biblically expressed, the dove descends on him, which is symbolic of the descent of love itself, or Christ consciousness in that sense, because if you become conscious of love itself, which is not just one aspect of it, but the very essence of it in life, then that makes you a Christed being, so to speak. And you have this amazing confluence of energies going on in your consciousness. Well, what we don't know by looking at the Bible story is the stage of maturity and development as a human being that Jesus was actually experiencing in himself. He's not your average Joe. And we are not the product alone of our educational system, whatever educational system he passed through before he went off to some secret place away from the Jewish culture, into Egypt or into India or into Tibet or wherever the heck he went. And whatever education he underwent at that time, it caused changes in what we would consider to be an average 30-year-old guy at the time of Judea, or I don't know if that's what it was called at the time. I don't know. But let's just say that area of the world where the Romans were in charge and the religion was in charge of the Jewish culture. And King Herod, that wonderful party pleaser, was the king. So it's a difficult time. The religion is got some crackpots in it that are very wealthy and very self-appointed and like to have the power over all the other folks. A common story among human created religions. Regardless of what the religion is about, it gets taken over by people who are pretty sure they like the style of life they've got, and they don't want other people carving out little empires of their kingdom. And then you had the Romans, who at that time had Nero going for them, or someone just before Nero. And so they were out there spreading out over the world in their civilization. Now, the Jews didn't realize they were part of the Roman civilization, but they were by the fact of conquering and owning the territory. So Herod was a Jewish king that the Romans allowed to rule the Jews, because the Jews have never been an easy people to manage. they kind of have their own idea about how they should live. And so the Romans were smart. When they took over a place, they would put local people in charge. They didn't want to interfere with your religion. As long as that religion didn't interfere with Rome's philosophy of things, you're welcome to it. And then all they really want to do is just tax the shit out of you and send it to Rome so Caligula can have parties. And they can keep the roads paved and the sewers working in Rome, and everybody's happy. So we don't know from Jesus' education who he actually is. And when we look at people in our world today, we look at the Buddha was going on 500 years before Jesus, by the way. We look at the high quality Buddhists. And today we look at people like Krishnamurti, who was a very developed guy. And we look at Alan Watts. We look at people who we would consider to be relatively spiritual people in our time. So, and they're not quite the same as the average guy, the guy that's out there just making his way, raising a family, trying to earn a living, living under some sort of despot in some part of the world. That's the human condition. The human condition is all the things that people experience wherever they experience them. But at the top of the human condition are the human beings who are more than just laborers. They're more than soldiers. They're more than business people. They're more than intellectuals. They are the people who are committed to the inner invisible world, manifesting through them and those beings that live in that inner world, becoming knowable to the human race. Now, all of a sudden, Jesus went from whatever he was, which we have no idea of, because he shows up in a little bit of story about him, facing the temptations of Christ, which is a very deeply developed character analysis in the Bible if you understand the symbols of it. So he comes up against the devil in the story, or intelligent evil, which says, hey, you want to rule the material world? I'll give you those powers. You can have them because you are qualified for the job. There's no point in giving a material job to somebody if they're not qualified for it. And he's not Caligula. He doesn't want to run the Roman Empire. He's past that. He is capable of actually being king of the world if he wants it. If he wants the job, evil says, you've got the job, man. You've got everything you need. So we see his character being tested by the material entity that we think of as evil, as an embodied intelligence, and he refuses it. He spends 40 days in the desert fasting, going through all these temptations of Christ, which are very important to consider because we're all in the world being offered the temptations of Christ. And unlike this guy, most of us are going, oh, hell, right. All right. I don't want to be king of the world, but I would like a small munitions factory in Cleveland, because then I can sell a lot of guns and bullets to the Air Force, or whatever it is that we want that is a desire-based material goal in us. The human race wants power. material power, and the money and prestige and authority that goes along with it. And these are the 7 deadly sins: the desire for power, and the desire for power implies power over, power within you. It takes a lot of personal power to be Putin. You got to have a lot of personal power to be Putin. Now, that also implies power over others, power in yourself. And when you express it over others, it's the same power, but spread out over a group of people, and they can't say no to it because someone will show up at the door and shoot them, or something equally devastating, because that's the nature of evil. Evil doesn't work the way good works, the way love works. Evil controls the form by controlling the life in the form. Put a gun to your head, and you're going to realize as they cock it and pull it back, that you either do what they're telling you to do, or they're going to shoot you in the head, and you'll be out of this dimension, and you won't be able to do anything. So most of us get that. Yeah, we'll give up our money. Some people won't give up anything, and you can shoot them. They love freedom that much. But either way, that's how evil works. It controls the form by controlling the life in the form, through threat, through illusion, through addiction, through any way it can. So you have to face those forms of control over you and demonstrate that you have more power over the world than evil does, which Jesus apparently did, if the Bible story is correct. And you can say, well, that contradicts the idea that these people actually crucified him. No, it doesn't, because his crucifixion was voluntary. It was voluntary when he chose love over all other things. Because what happens, how the world chooses to regard love in him, he is willing to accept. That's why he said to them, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." They are rejecting love, and I cannot fight them because I am love. I have surrendered myself to it. So he had already long ago, 3 years ago, actually, not that long ago, but he had long ago from the human experience chosen love as the ultimate authority in his life and said no to material power, which he had plenty of, obviously. And he just put it on hold. He didn't tell Herod to do things that he wanted him to do. He didn't tell him not to behead John the Baptist, which he would have said if he had any power over Herod. He didn't tell Pontius Pilate, don't crucify me, because Pontius Pilate was doing his job. He was told to convict this guy because he's committed religious crimes, and you are bound by your legal authority with the Jewish state, the Jewish culture, to let us crucify the people we think deserve it. And he tried in certain ways to get Jesus off. He said, I can't find any fault with this guy. I don't think he's guilty of anything that the Romans would kill him for. So why do you want to kill him? And they said, well, we want to do it anyway. So they invoked that law. And he said, okay, crucify him. And then he still tried to give him a way out by saying, okay, now you have a choice. You can crucify this guy because it's Passover or whatever the holiday was that they had the opportunity to make this choice. So free Jesus or free this known criminal, Barabbas. So the church saw that coming, and they engineered a way out of that by getting people out in the crowd who were louder than the people in the crowd who didn't know Jesus. How many people actually knew him? He'd ridden into town donkey, and he hadn't committed a lot of miracles in town. He had a reputation out in the countryside for doing things that were pretty remarkable. But he didn't glow with the light of the sun to people when they looked at him, because what? Because love is invisible in the consciousness of us, human beings who look into the world. Now, how did Jesus look to those who see the world of spiritual energy? He probably looked like a freaking sunrise to the people who could see it. But to the average guy, No, we can't see crap. We don't know what it looks like. We don't, and this is true today as it was then. So they chose Barabbas, and Barabbas goes free, and we make a movie about him later, and we talk about all this stuff. And Jesus heads to go pick up his cross and drag it up the hill. So this went on. Now, you don't have to buy into any of this story because most of us weren't there. And when I say most of us, I mean most of us. That doesn't mean all of us weren't there, because I think at a time we're entering right now, and I'm saying this because this is an esoteric story, the spiritual people who surround the spiritual world, who surround humanity in the spiritual world, have certain perceptions. And one of their comments was that at the time of the reappearance of the Christ, not Jesus, but the Christ consciousness in a human being, at the time that, because I don't know that the two are going to happen at the same time. Jesus is a very impressive being, but impressive beings have jobs, and his job at that time was to embody love. His job today may be to do something completely different in the spiritual world, and someone else is undertaking the job of embodying Christ consciousness as the world teacher for humanity. Now, that's how the esoteric world sees it, and they consider that being to be Maitreya, who is a bodhisattva like the Buddha, but different. He's embodying love, and the Buddha was embodying wisdom, and the two together is love, wisdom, and that's the nature of the universal energy. So, God, this is a complicated issue, but the invisible becoming visible requires an instrument inside of us that can do that. And in the case of Jesus, we can assume that he saw love, but we don't know. He never remarked to anybody in the story, hey, guess what? I've got this beautiful golden light inside of me, and I think it's a good thing. He goes along from there to a wedding. He doesn't really do much in between, does he? And when he gets to the wedding, his mom tells him they're out of wine. And his comment about that is, what's that got to do with me? So you see, he wasn't speaking from, wow, I've got this piggy bank inside of me and I can just spill out beans whenever I want to, and we can have new wine. He didn't say that. He said, what do you got? What's that got to do with me? I'm sorry they're out of wine, but I didn't order the wine. She ignores him and tells the servants, go do whatever this guy tells you to do. She doesn't take him off the hook when he says, he says, my time hasn't come. So whatever he's waiting for to happen that turns that thing loose in him that he knows entered him, he's not stupid. He knows that when he got baptized, some magnificent, monstrous, gigantic reality came into confluence with him. And that's the point of humans. We don't know where Jesus stood on the scale of humanity, except that we know he's not at the bottom. So he's you know, you can wonder how human beings get as good as they are, how Einstein gets the way he is, who's another Jewish person, or any of the others that create these great art, this great music, these great inventions, Michelangelo, whoever it is, how do they get to the point where they can pick up a hammer and chisel and whack out the Piatra? I can't do that. I have no idea how Michelangelo even picked out the piece of marble that had the Piatra in it. So Jesus is not a beginner. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not a beginner. You're not a beginner. No one is a beginner anymore, I don't think. I don't think we're cranking out new souls. I think we're bringing people back around over and over and over. I think the Buddhist and Hindu and other groups that subscribe to reincarnation aren't making it up. They're recognizing a reality that nature goes through in its universe, of which humans are a participant. We can't be separate from the rest of the universe. We're part of it. And we grow and evolve and develop in it the way everything else does, but at our level, at this level out here, which is called humanity. Humanity is living. Now, in the inner world, these worlds here going towards the heart of the sun, they're responsive to love. Love is functioning there. And all the beings that live there in this mess of Mandalic activity, they're conscious of, and while they may not see love, they see angelic beings that by love passing through those beings light them up with this incredible energy. And so they've come to know, oh, that's love. No, it's not really love. It's love in a particular spiritual being. And another being, one of these on the inner ringers, might blaze out a completely different color. It might be orange on one level, and it might be purple on another, and it might be yellow on another. We have to learn that if we're going to live in a fully invested universe, even one solar system universe. So Jesus is a human being who walked his way upward in development to meet love coming downward to the human race, which is what makes him an utterly remarkable being. Love did not choose the Buddha or some other being. At that point in time, it didn't choose anybody other than this one guy. And he wasn't just the Messiah for the Jews, and I can't tell you that he was or wasn't because I'm not in that ilk, and they have their own way of figuring all that out. Like the Chinese trying to decide who the Dalai Lama is, and the Dalai Lama says, we've got that worked out among the Buddhists. We don't ask Chinese to approve who we pick as the Dalai Lama. We'll do that ourselves, thank you. But the Chinese like to be in control of all of that. So they're like, well, you pick a guy if you want, but if we don't approve of him being the Dalai Lama, then he isn't the Dalai Lama. So they've got that inner structure going because the Communist Party doesn't believe in any of that mumbo jumbo out there any more than a lot of other people don't believe in reincarnation or the soul or any other spiritual or love for that matter. But Jesus did. He believed in a lot of things that we don't know about because he didn't discuss it with anybody before he with John. But we do know that he came to John, who's baptizing people, and said, baptize me, which tells you that the whole Jewish spiritual structure, as John was representing it, was acceptable to him. He had reverence for it because he asked to be indoctrinated into its depth. And that's after being 30-year-old guy who'd been through whatever he'd already been through. And John looks at him and says, wow, you should be baptizing me because he recognized this is a guy of greater spiritual potential than John had. But Jesus, which shows you that he wasn't an idiot, he said, no, this is the way it needs to go. You baptize me. So they have that little tete-a-tete. And after the conversation, John says, okay, come on in, dunk, dunk, and up he goes, and off he goes. And so love comes shoo, down into this human being. Now, how can he handle that? And you can think, oh, well, it was just, well, that felt good. Wow, tea is really kicking in. So, but it's more than that. This is the creative power of the universe, the actual creative power of the universe as a fully conscious entity called life or God or divine consciousness or whatever presence you want to call it. But it wasn't just standing next to a bonfire. This energy was living, conscious, and present in him all of a sudden. And it's the energy that makes solar systems rotate and travel around these dinner plates with other vast beings and consciousness and activity in the whole solar system, and then in the galaxy, and then in all the galaxies. And there are millions, billions, maybe trillions of them. So it's not a small presence to enter into the active conscious relationship with a human being. It would be incredibly overwhelming to anyone who had not passed through all the temptations of Christ out here in these denser wheels. He had already passed all those tests in himself So it was known somehow to love that this guy is capable of being this. And that's the prophesized Messiah of the Jewish people. Somebody will come along at a certain point. And now this is what prophecy is about. And if you don't believe there's intelligent process involved in these magnificent cultural relationships to greater conscious being, to God, to love, to the energies of life, then you don't, and that's fine. But that doesn't make science disappear. It doesn't make spirituality disappear. And so we have to give ourselves room, because this is all operating in the invisible. It's the invisible in him. I don't know that he saw it at all, or that it had any color or quality or taste, but suddenly it's living in him, and he knows it. He knows it's there. He knew something before he ever went to get baptized. He'd already done 40 days in the desert and the temptations, and said no to them. He already understood a lot of things and had had some education somewhere by some really developed friends of his. But I doubt, personally, I doubt that he realized the immensity of what had just entered into him. What I am amazed by is that he could handle it. He didn't just burst into flames, which means he had a certain kind of purity, because as the Bible says, you can't put new wine in old bottles. If you don't have purification going on in your nature, and you pour that kind of intense life force into something, you're a bottle. And if it enters you, then you're just very likely to have a combustion problem, to shatter, to burn, to melt, to whatever we're going to do if too much heat comes. So he handled it apparently quite well. He just went on about his business and eventually shows up at a wedding where he turns water into wine. But he doesn't turn the water into wine, does he? Love does, through him. Now he's engaged. He puts his hand over the water and goes, I don't know what the hell am I doing here? Are you going to turn this water into wine? Or is this just going to stay water and I'm going to look like an idiot and mom will have to apologize to me? So I don't know what was going through his mind, but I know he gave it a shot and said, well, okay, go get empty bottles, fill them with water, bring the water to me. So the servants did that, which made them the witnesses, which is interesting that the servants and his friends, anybody that was standing around we don't know about, are the only real witnesses to what actually happened, because the servants filled the jugs, and they were like 40 gallons a piece, and there were like 8 of them or something. I don't know. There's like 250 gallons of wine or something at this party. They really must have been juiced by the time the wedding was over. Anyway, the point is that the water shows up, and the witnesses who filled the jugs know it's water, and he does some handcraft, and love turns it into a good Pinot Noir or whatever that red wine was at the time, and so good that he gets praised by somebody at the wedding. I forget who, one of the people, who says, man, this is not only good wine, this is the best wine I've ever had. So, and he congratulates the guy who's throwing the wedding to say, you didn't bring out the best wine first, because no one does that. They bring out the cheap shit first, and they get the palate waked up, and then they bring out the best wine, or they bring out the best wine first, because then when they're I'm sorry, I get this mixed up because I haven't had a wedding lately. So they bring out the best wine first, which is the tradition of the day, and they give everybody a sip of something where they go, wow, this is really a good claret. And so by the time they've had a bit of wine, you could start bringing out the lesser wine as you get further back in the wine cellar. And of course, in those days, it wasn't their wine. They had to hire a wine merchant to bring wine, and they did. Somebody bought the wine, and they just didn't have enough money, so they didn't bring enough. And more people showed up for this wedding. Apparently, they were more popular than people thought, and they ran out of wine. So, but it's a spiritual opportunity for love to get its chops up and to give Jesus a time to get his feet under him and recognize, wow, this stuff works. I mean, Who can turn water into wine? Nobody. Nobody can. Science can't do it today. Cannot do it. That's a living thing. That grapes and fermentation and things like that have to happen. You can make good wine. You can let nature join you to make good wine, but you can't create it out of waving your hands at it. You got to treat it well. You got to respect the grapes. You got to do all that stuff, and the fermentation process and the filter process and the bottling process. And transformation, transmutation, those are gifts of love. They aren't gifts of human ability. We don't transform and transmute. Not yet. We will, because fusion power coming along any minute now, 5 years from now. But fusion power, when it arrives, is an act of creation. You actually take hydrogen and turn it into helium-3 or something like that by doing it the way nature does it, whatever that's going to be. And right now they're trying to do it with the temperatures of the sun because that's how the sun does it. But there might be another way to do it that we're just on the edge of discovering. But either way, it will be when humanity is ready to take on love itself. And that probably will be one of the first manifestations of it. I personally think it will appear in humanity as a process, duplicatable process, because it will change the whole world. Oil suddenly becomes unnecessary for fuel. It's great for plastics and for building things and for getting graphene or whatever. I don't know where they get graphene from, but they take it from some kind of carbon base. So it'll be great for other stuff, but it won't be running all the industry of the world. And we will have basically free electricity, relatively free. It can be free for everybody who has no money, because it will be so cheap that the people who have a lot of money can pay for millions of people to have free electricity simply because they want to. Then everything changes. Everything changes because we don't realize how, I mean, industrial people do, economic people do, they realize how much of the world unity is contained and controlled by the manipulation of carbon-based products like coal and oil and gas, which doesn't make it bad. It makes it possible for us to have a civilization to begin with, but that civilization's collapsing. You can see it going on. And while it's nice to say we're all going to be driving Teslas, you've got to make the electricity that goes into that new battery that Elon has patented or developed or putting in his Teslas with aluminum ions in it, which is great because they don't burn, and other values they have. But that'll make that great, but you still have to generate electricity to put it in it. And that has to be generated by something other than carbon. Now, it's already generated in Canada largely by water flowing downhill and spinning generators, as Tesla demonstrated. You know that Tesla generators are still running electricity at Niagara Falls. Yeah, he saw that in a vision when he was a child. He looked at a picture of Niagara Falls, which was an early day of photography because it's around the late 1800s. And he said, someday I will harness the power of that waterfall to generate electricity. And later in his life, he was the guy that designed the generators they built to generate electricity from Niagara Falls or from the river. I don't know where the dam is that generates the electricity. So you see, electricity coming from transformation of hydrogen into helium-3 or something like that through whatever process they come up with, that's an act, that's a material demonstration of the power of love. Because it's love at the heart of the sun that's turning helium and hydrogen into all the elements. You have to keep bringing elements up in order to get to the level where you have nuclear power. That's why they're heavier and heavier and heavier. There's a lot more neutrons, protons, and electrons in a radioactive isotope than there is hydrogen. Hydrogen floats around out there in the air because it's got one electron, one proton, and one neutron. There's nothing there. It's just a little basic mineral. But if you start adding protons and electrons to minerals, they get more and more complicated. They get more and more heavy. They have more and more electron shells. They become all the way up to gold, and then from gold on up to the radioactive ones. So love is invisible inside us. And while we can make fusion power, that won't make love visible either. That will simply make energy created out of the process that love uses to change the lattices inside the minerals from something lesser to something greater. And in doing that, you destroy the hydrogen atom to create the helium atom. In creation, there is destruction. You destroy something to make something. That's how it grows. You got to take mud or clay out of its form in the clay bank. You got to destroy the side of a mountain to make a whole bunch of pots, because you're reshaping it, you're reworking. And that's not transformation and transmutation, even though you might take the pot, bake it in a kiln, and then paint it really well and have some really nice pottery. It's still pottery. And if you crush it back down to it'll just become dust, and you're transforming the shape, but you're not transforming the molecular atoms. Love is, because love is elevating all minerals towards something. I don't know where they're going, but eventually the mineral kingdom disappears. Where does it disappear to? It disappears into radiation. It comes out the top. If you make, and it's interesting because the heavier you make a metal, you'd think it'll sink to the bottom, and the universe will just be one dense bottom. But it doesn't. As you get up into radioactive isotopes like plutonium and cesium and those kind of things, they're pouring off electrons. They're pouring out their life essence into the universe at such a high stage that there's no density to them at all. So the more they get, the more density they take on, the closer they're going towards eventually radiating themselves out of existence. Very opposite of what we think adding density would do. So what do we think about all of that? Well, we just think that God has a very interesting process in motion in the universe, because every star that we see in the heavens is an atomic furnace generating these processes through a life process, through being aware of the energy of love and applying it to your own innate nature. And until someone can talk to the solar logos, the solar being, that's the whole system is his body of manifestation, and go, what are you up to? And it can look at you and go, universal creation. I'm doing what love's telling me to do. I'm doing what life is giving me to do. I'm doing my existence, my being eternally, and I'm growing up in it. And so welcome to the party. So there are immense truths buried in the inner plane where love is emanating out into the world in its invisibility. And neutrinos and things, they pass right through the earth just like it wasn't even there, like thought passing through air, and occasionally bump into something, cause a little refractory or something, I don't know. But it's amazing what's going on in the invisible part of the universe, the part that's invisible to the human eye, because we only see a very narrow spectrum. If you widen that spectrum, not just into X-ray and ultraviolet and infrared, but if you widen that spectrum into energies that are utterly invisible, utterly unknown to the science of today, then you're going to pass into the regions where love is like everywhere. Everybody goes, yeah, that's love in that being. That's love in that being. what we do, if you could see our energy field, our aura, as the spiritual people would call it, if you could see the human aura, then you would see how we refract love into the physical environment around us based on our purity, our quality of consciousness, our quality of emotional development, our quality of physical development. That's how we refract love into the space. But it's still invisible to the naked eye, and it could be seen by inner senses if we open them. And opening an inner sense is different from evolving it. You don't have to take a butterfly to the point of becoming a hummingbird in order to see love. If you open your inner senses, a lot of frequencies become visible because it's already there in you. You're simply not looking. It's not a way in which you've been trained to see. And nature has that sense closed in a human being because you've got to stop at a stoplight on your way to Ralph's Market. And if you have too much input coming into your senses and you can't discriminate between one frequency and another because you don't have enough experience in it all, then you're going to run the stoplight and get killed. So nature has a way of protecting its creatures by limiting the use of their eye and their inner senses to the field in which they live. Now, the only way we can change that in a human being, because we have our own self-development in our hands, is by being responsible for the senses you got, taking on the practicality of discrimination, seeking to make the invisible visible to you, and giving yourself the power to integrate it with the other energies and frequencies and still be able to go to Ralph's. Or you're going to go enter into a monastery of some kind and let other people feed you, take care of you, clothe you, lead you out into the sunlight and sit you down, because you're busy being overwhelmed by all of these energies on the inner plane, and you're telling them some secrets they need to hear so they can tell it to the public. Kind of like the oracles of Delphi or something. I don't know what they were like. They might have been partiers on the weekend, but they did the job of tuning into the inner voices of their time and giving advice, which I presume to be good advice, or they wouldn't have been famous for it. So all of this is true. Now the question is how do you do this? Well, you have all the tools to do it already active in the human group, human experience. Now, not everybody is educated similarly, so it would take more to express to certain stages of people how to do this than it would others. But don't assume that Elon Musk is easier to train to see these higher and inner frequencies than someone who's driving taxi in South Africa and has no education, because that would be a mistake to think that education as we think of it, this laughable education that we get at colleges today, which has now been degraded to the point where it's trying to reinvent new sexes and things of that nature. If you think that education is what's necessary, you might be wrong. You're not totally wrong, because discrimination and maturity of thought and action does depend on learning how to tell the difference between shit and shinola, as they used to say. That's when shinola was a company making, maybe they still are, making shoe polish, brown shoe polish to be specific. So here we are. And the human race needs to be able to interact with love and come to agreement on it, conversation about it, not turn ourselves over to some religious entity in a pretty little red hat or something to tell us what God wants us to do, because God is love, and I'm an interpreter of God's purpose on earth, so I'll tell you how he wants you to polish your shoes. That's not where we're going. Because, I mean, that's not a bad thing. If someone knows more about love than you do, listen to them. But that doesn't mean those red hats at the Catholic Church all do. Some do, by the way. You can't never throw the baby out with the bathwater. a failing civilization doesn't mean you utterly throw it out. The Roman civilization is gone. We're not building any more Colosseums. We don't even know who the architect was at this point. Well, maybe they do. I don't study Roman history. Maybe Aguilera's or somebody was an architect of whoever he was damn good, because after all this time, a lot of it is still standing. And so we need to understand how to apply intellect, which is the gift of personal development, towards knowledge. Personal evolution in a human being towards knowledge, on the way to knowledge, develops intellect and develops schools to teach knowledgeable things. And that's a very important part of being able to assume the posture in your life and the process and attitude, because a posture is more than physical. It's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, and it's the release of all of that to that which is inner and invisible. So that posture requires discrimination, reason, logic, deduction. Well, as they say, reason, discernment, justice, and honor. Those four things make up the intellectual structure. That's reason, discernment, justice. Discernment is the same basically as discrimination. Reason, discernment, justice, and honor. These are intellectual concepts founded on intelligence. And if we examine each of those and we give ourselves at least a passing grade in them, then we are preparing ourselves to be able to hold the posture necessary to allow ourselves to bring love from the invisible into the visible. Because intellect is a visible process. When you're talking to Brett Weinstein or one of the great physicists of the day, and you watch two of them talking to each other, and you have no idea what they're talking about because they're using terminologies that you have no meaning behind, because each symbol that they describe in their conversation is arrived at through an immense amount of scientific effort by a lot of mathematicians and physicists to come to a place where that symbol can represent a truth we've all agreed upon. We have decided that it has been proven. It's settled science, as they like to say, which is a total misuse of the term when it's applied to global warming and concepts that are settled. Science is 2 and 2 is 4. Yeah, it's settled. We don't expect 2 and 2 to be anything else. Now, if we get to quantum mechanics and in the world of love, and 2 and 2 suddenly produces 18, then we have to think about it, because that's a new science engaged in the process. But material science, as it will come to be known, is settled science to a degree. We've understood all these, Planck's theorem and all of this stuff, that these laws and theorems and ideas from Pythagoras on down all are based on people proving it. When I was proving geometric theorems in school, when you got to a conclusion, it's a very satisfying sense of experience. How do you know that all the angles inside of a triangle add up to a certain number? No matter what the triangle is, shape the triangle any way you want, way far out with a little tiny point, or an equilateral triangle with all the sides equal, or a really tall one. Doesn't matter how you shape the triangle. The inside angles are all going to add up to a certain number of degrees. So, but we don't, how do you prove that? Now prove that to me. Well, that's what Pythagoras is doing with his formula for it. So when you prove that by actually reasoning and logically working it out, it's like building an arch. It stands. It's when you're done, you go, okay, that's proven. If material laws are consistent, then that is a proven fact. And I don't care what you do about it, I know it's true. So now I can figure out a lot of other things, because if I know that this angle over here is 18 degrees, I know that the other two angles added up are going to be that amount of degrees, right? And other mathematical formulas. So when you're talking to quantum physicists, you're talking about incredibly complex relationships between time and space and dimensions within that space, and how this becomes that and that becomes this, and all of that. And that's an extraordinary ability of human mind to do. It takes extraordinary mind to be able to take on ourselves all of those other formulas worked up by all those other scientists and add them up into great links of formula on those giant blackboards we see in the movies, and have that prove that this equals that, and always will, always will. And all of these symbols are proven, unless they're a symbol that demonstrates this is not absolutely proven, but we're using it here as an assumption about the future, which is like proving love. You have to assume that if you assume there's an energy in the universe that isn't realized yet, and we want to call that energy X, that X energy could be love. That's the energy of life that is unchangeable, consistent, and continuous. And it's very hard to do that with love, because love is a creative energy. It's not governed by anything except the purpose of life itself. And spirit, which is a totally unknown energy in the universe, it's seen, thought about, written about, talked about, but the energy itself and how it comes to be in the universe and what governs it, the laws that govern it, aren't very well known by most human beings. There are some that do know it and do understand it, and they don't try to explain it to physicists, because physicists don't even know that's real. So spirit creates. Now, how do we ever get to a triangle? The Pythagorean triangle is 1 turned into 2, and the 2 turned into 3. That's how we get to 3. We get to 3 by having a purpose for making 1 into 2. And that purpose forms the other corner of the 2, because you can't eliminate it. You can't turn 1 into 2 unless some purpose comes into action. Now, you could think that's not true. I don't care. I don't care what anybody thinks. I mean, a rock rolling down the hill can land on another rock and split it from a single rock into 2 rocks. You can say, well, that just happened. That's got nothing to do with purpose. But that's not true. It's just the purpose is hidden, because it's so complex in a universe where gravity brings the rocks from the top of the hill to the bottom. So when the 2 becomes 3, the third corner of that triangle appears as the purpose for creating the other 2. And now we have the number 3. Then we can go to the number 4. And the moment you created the number 3, you gave birth to a creative power, because it's not one single thing. It's one single thing that can apply itself infinitely based on the 2. In other words, you can have a lot of reasons to create 2 out of 1 based on what those 2 are. And when we talk about fusion power, you're talking about creating hydrogen into helium by compressing 2 hydrogen atoms together. And you don't need all the parts of both of those hydrogen atoms when you create helium. So you got some extra leftover stuff. And that extra leftover stuff can be converted into electrical energy because it releases so much energy. 5 times the energy of fission power, which is breaking an atom. Fission destroys an atom. Well, you can't destroy the atom, but you can break it into smaller elements. As a mineral, a type of mineral. So when you do that, when you peel off atoms by bombarding them and scattering their atoms and electrons around, you release an enormous amount of contained energy. It's all holding those guys together, and suddenly all the release of that energy that's keeping all of that in a relatively unstable stability, suddenly you have an explosion. Fusion power puts things together, but the leftover parts are energetic. So you don't need all of them. You need new stuff, and new stuff comes in. And anyway, I'm obviously not a nuclear physicist, so I'm not going to talk about how to make fusion elements. But I'm telling you that the force that makes this all work is a creative force called love. And love in the mineral kingdom demonstrates a certain way. Love in the plant kingdom demonstrates a certain way. And while the mineral kingdom releases through radiation, the plant kingdom releases through aroma. When the life that's in that rose reaches the end of its natural life, not the end of just one blossom, but when the earth no longer needs roses, as right now, we almost no longer need eucalyptus, for example. Eucalyptus is a highly pungent, highly aromatic, highly flammable, highly radioactive in the sense of essence of smell plant. So that tells you that it's a very ancient tree, in the case of tree eucalyptus, and it's reached a point where it's starting to release itself out of being there's a point where the sap of a eucalyptus tree is so much like kerosene or something aromatic or dynamic. Eucalyptus oil, you put it in the hot tub or you put it in the sauna, and boy, does it smell the place up. So the aroma of the plant kingdom is its essence releasing itself into the environment. And when it reaches a certain stage of volatility, like minerals, it will disappear, and that plant will no longer be alive. I lived in Oregon at a time, not too distant from when Bandon, Oregon was a little town on the coast in Oregon near Coos Bay. And it had a Scottish, I forget what they call it, Scotch broom or something. I don't know the name of it. Came from Scotland. Some Scot immigrants came, and they brought this with them as a gift to Bandon, because it was pretty yellow stuff, I think, when it kind of bloomed. I remember seeing it, and I think that's what it was. I could have been looking at oak weed. I don't know. But anyway, it grew like a weed in Bandon. It was a weed. And people cultivated it at first, and then it just kind of went to the fields around it and grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until the whole damn town was covered in this thing. And then it got a new name, fireweed. That's what people called it, because it caught fire one day and it burned the entire town down. I mean, it burned the town down, kind of like what's going on in Lahaina or over in Pacific Palisades in California. That Bandon grew back. Bandon grew back because the whole town was wood, and I don't know what the hell. In those days, back in the early 20th century, we didn't, Chicago burned. Things burn. They're made out of wood. They burn because they've got volatile oils in them. Pine oil burns like crazy. All sap pretty much burns. Not all plant sap, but tree sap, a lot of it burns like crazy. So animals, on the other hand, don't release themselves through their aroma, but they do release themselves through their animal magnetism. They reach a place where they, and when we look at a black stallion and we see the animal magnetism of this magnificent creature in full gallop out in the wild, we are stunned by the beauty and the energy and the magnificence of the spirit of that creature, that animal creature. And if you go back and look at an Eohippus, which was a horse maybe, a few million years ago, you didn't have quite the same dramatic heart-thumping appreciation of an Eohippus in full gallop. So maybe the local natives did, but today we'd look at that and go, well, that's like a pig running. It just doesn't give us quite the same spirit. Not that pigs don't have spirit. They're wonderful creatures. And they certainly have a sense of smell. So animals have, and this includes human animals, by the way. I mean, not to make a point on it, but I mean, you know, a Raquel Welch, which was an actress back in the 50s and 60s, and other actresses and actors in the humankind are magnificent animals, magnificent creatures to look at. We just look at them and go, wow, look at that. And it's how it goes. Arnold Schwarzenegger to some women would have been a magnificent creature. Now, what it is about the human animal or Brad Pitt or anyone else that becomes popular, they become popular for a reason, because the rest of us look at them and go, I like watching Sean Connery in a movie. It's not that he's the greatest actor ever. I just like watching his combination of mind, emotions, and form interact with other people, especially when they're young and sexy. So human animals are a little different, but it's the same principle as a black stallion. It's just the black stallion is not conscious of itself as a self-conscious, aware being. And this is why we admire intellect, admire the self-development of a human person, even though we don't know how they got the way they are. And we can think that Jeff Bezos marries a pretty girl with assets because he's got $100 billion. Well, okay, that helps. No question about it. It helps that you've got unlimited wealth, never to run out wealth. You own the biggest oil field in Texas. But it's who he is that made that happen in his life, or karma. We don't forget about karma. It's back there a ways in our conversation, but it's still here. Either way, if it continues, Jeff Bezos will be wealthy long after he's dead. Elvis is still earning more money than I make any day of the week. So that's how it goes. And we admire the capacity to manage, control, or develop material things. And so the gifts of powerful human people, and it can be beauty, it can be wealth, it can be power, it can be other things that we admire, their intelligence, their artistic ability, their organizational ability. And when you combine two or three of these abilities in a human being, you've got some capacity. So it isn't just physical looks like the black stallion. It's a combination of reason, discernment, justice, and honor, plus the added quality of spiritual potency, which we don't know how to measure, except that it's there. It's there in some people. So human race is just coming into the magnificence of what it is. Now, I don't know what it felt like to be near Jesus or to hang out with him when he's on the road with the gang, but I'm quite certain that it was a very arresting presence to be around, particularly because of the certainty of self. That's one of the things I really admire about true spiritual presences that honor love in themselves. There's no doubt in them. There's no doubt in Putin, because he's building personal power into a form of government and a creation of country and a unification of everybody around that same rallying flag, which is now starting to tatter because, as it turns out, the surrendering to the temptations of Christ doesn't lead the world to love. It leads it away from love, even though it develops intellect, which you can later apply to love if you want to find that in yourself. So we can advise Putin how to apply his powers to discovering and releasing love in himself, but at this point, he may not be interested. He may have other things on his mind, but he will come to it. Every Napoleon comes to a Waterloo, comes to the place where they realize that the highest use of power comes through synthesis, through giving it up to the field and the group to strengthen the power and everything else, to be able to integrate with love and create a unified spirit of living. In the end, there's no other choice. Because if you try to use it to create a temple of self-worship, it will fall, it will topple, it won't, because you're sucking the material residue of all of that group into yourself to create a pyramidic structure. And in the end, it doesn't benefit the guy who's laying the stones for the pyramid. But if you give that power out into and diffuse it into all of the atoms of the human group and give them all strength, they can use that to liberate themselves from having to build pyramids, and they can use that strength to build a group structure that we can all share and use, and not just bury some king in or worship some god in. They weren't burying kings, I think, in the Great Pyramid, even though there's a sarcophagus in there. I think we were building that structure and many of the other pyramidic structures to place ourselves into contact with higher energy or higher entities or higher universal beings, which is why you have the Great Pyramid and the Little Pyramids, a replica of what? Orion's belt. Now, I don't assume these guys were idiots. Anybody that could build a Great Pyramid and all the other magnificent things that went along with that knew who Orion was in some spiritual spatial way, not the material idea of Orion's belt as several stars that form that symbol, but who is the creature? Who is the being that manifests as Orion? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the meaning behind the symbol. And to get to the meaning behind the symbol of the Great Pyramid, you're going to have to get to the being that it represents a relationship to. And Hermes, who came out of Egypt, gave us the concept of as above, so below. So whatever's going on in Orion's belt by that being that makes up Orion, there's a replica of that on Earth that the Egyptians felt obligated to create a magnificent structure or several magnificent structures to put themselves into harmony with, to bring that wit and intelligence and life and maybe the love into human expression with us. And then we see Egypt going through worshiping the moon and worshiping the sun. And when you worship the sun, you're going to be worshiping a constellational being, because our sun is part of some constellation for somebody. I don't know who, because we don't know what it is yet. But it will come to be known as we grow up into the business of the sun. Who's the sun interacting with in a creative and constructive process? Those other beings, similar solar beings, like planetary beings, are going to, of themselves, be in honor or reverence to far greater, more advanced being, and so on down to us. So somewhere in all of this is love. And when we bring that into our conscious awareness and out into our expressions and experiences, we are forming a chain of continuity from the human heart to the divine creator of the universe itself. Now, we know that. How do we know that? We know that because love itself is an energy that life, an indissoluble, indivisible, irreducible energy that is in life itself, which is why all of the mathematics and physics of the universe in the end will be seen to be under the creative control of love itself. And that love, that energy, that same thing entered into the human race in the form of a descent into Jesus, so that we could experience a relationship to it that would eventually liberate us from our material limitations and enter into that magnificent freedom. Now, that may not be true. If it's not true, you better come up with something that is true. In the meantime, by applying our intention to know love in ourselves, we can get a step closer to knowing the divine in us, the God in us that makes the universe a viable being, and enter into relationship that produces a cooperative relationship, allowing it to become a human reflection of the divine on earth. Now, in that sense, what difference does it make? We don't want to become a divine representation on earth of Sirius or Pleiades or Great Bear or any of these constellations if they're not ruled by love. If they're not ruled by love, piss off. We don't need any more evil. We don't need any cosmic evil. So if there's a soul in these great cosmic beings, there's a spirit in them that comes out of life itself, and that has good in it, the will to good, it has love, it has positive values that we associate with love, then okay, let's open up a relationship. But if they're at war with themselves and they have chaotic consciousness in them, head out to some, let's go in a different direction. So, and I think that the history of humanity is a history of relationship, not just to ourselves and to our planet, but to all of these beings, because they are all self-aware of the universe in which they whirl through space as a little dinner plate going around a greater surface of a dinner plate like this stuff is. And here we are circling through all these 12 zodiacal signs, not in that circle, but in the zodiacal circle of greater and greater circles, greater and greater wheels in the universe. And if they're all governed by love, then that means there's a lot of love in the universe that we're unconscious of, that we're unaware of. And because I hold with those who espouse that love is an aspect of life, it's a genuine aspect of life. Because I am alive, I need to know what that is, because it's apparently part of my life. I'm not some other life. I'm the life of life itself. So I can be unconscious of a lot of things that life holds within it, but that doesn't make me less than life. It means that I don't know more about life. I don't know what all these inner rings, all the way back to the source of life, are doing or thinking or feeling or loving. But I want to know so that I can be on a more deeply holistic relationship to the center of life, in the heart of the universe, in the heart of a galaxy, in the heart of a solar system, in the heart of our planet, in the heart of me. Because I think life offers that through love to its whole universe. And different lives are conscious of it than others. Everybody's got a certain amount of life that they're conscious of. I don't think anything in the universe at this stage of the universe's evolution is fully conscious of life. Life's a pretty big thing. And because it created the universe intentionally through purpose, which creates that triangle top through the division into opposites of spirit and matter, we all have a chance to learn something more about life. And the next thing we need to learn about life is love as a property of our own inner nature, and how to bring that out into the outer nature and make it a viable, creative component of every single breath we take, every word we speak, every thought we think, everything we do. Not because good is good, but because life is. Life produces that thing. And if life is producing it and putting it out, what are you going to do? Ignore it? That's what evil is. Life ignoring human life, other lives perhaps, ignoring love. You can ignore it. You can tell it to piss off. And some do, because of personal desire, personal ambition, back to the temptations of the Christ. Do you want to be king of the world? Well, we're going to have to raise an army, a mighty army. Oh boy, another mighty army. Let's do that. Let's raise another mighty army and arm it with mighty weapons and go out and stomp around the world like Alexander the Great did and conquer it. How much did he conquer? I don't know, but a lot. He conquered everything he knew about, that he could get to one way or another, on a camel, a horse, a boat. So we don't necessarily need another world conquering hero like Alexander the Great. But what did Alexander the Great do that was viable and good? He spread the Greek culture everywhere, all over the place. And the Greek culture had a positive structure going on inside its philosophy of organizational thinking. So, and there were other philosophies going on in other cultures that also wanted to create worldwide civilizations, which were not so kind to the people in it. The Greek culture being based on a philosophy of reasoned goodness, reasoned cooperation, reasoned interaction through a governing body, thanks to Plato and the folks like that who thought about governing bodies. They weren't a bad culture to spread around the world. If you're going to develop human beings and they're going to grow in population, it'd be nice if they had a culture that didn't cannibalize everything else. Now, the Romans weren't quite so inclusive. Their idea of inclusion was, you work for us now. Where the Greeks had a more philosophical approach to it. Do you want to be part of our trading group, and do you want to be part of our Grecian empire? And we won't necessarily, we got ships, we got men, we got the Spartans over here who can kick your ass any day of the week, but we don't want to do that. We want to work with you. We want to reason with you. We want to share with you and trade with you and treat you the way you want to treat us. So it wasn't exactly love is the king of the world, but it was the idea of turning rational philosophy, intellectual philosophy, into a practical idea, which is basically democracy. Treat them the way you want to be treated, pass only the laws that manage that, punish only the people who violate that, because that's the agreement we've come to live under. And you have a republic, as we do in America. It's not a democracy, and it's subtle. The difference between a democracy requires a lot more conscious participation and a lot more love active in the heart than America has. So they set up a republic, which was what Plato said. Democracies don't work. It didn't mean they weren't bad. It just means that humans aren't good enough to deserve it. But a republic, which is representative government, that can work. And it has its dangers, because you see, watching Congress bit back with each other and be ridiculous when you watch who they are and what they're saying, and you really see the duplicity among them. You realize that representative government has its dangers, but that's why we built one like the American Constitution that is self-balancing. You got the judicial, you got the governing, you got the administrative. And if any of those start to get out of balance with each other, then we have to rein them back in according to the Constitution, which was set up to be a balancing agent. So, we got through 300 years of it so far, and I think we'll probably make it further. I think we'll probably get along maybe 1,000 years. I think the United States may survive that long before it evolves into a greater form of government, one that is more democratic, one that is more attuned to love, which means that the humans that make up the children, it's a lot of generations in 1,000 years. There's been a lot of generations since the Puritans landed, but every generation needs to be taught its relationship to the invisibility of love, and how to open the senses, and how to open in the intellect to the realization that it is there somehow, has already happened. Quantum mechanics is the intellect acknowledging there's a type of physics out here that we don't understand and we don't see it. And you're not going to build an instrument that love is going to raise the meter off of easily, until you figure out that there's an energy that is magnificent aspect of life itself that's invisible to us. So at the Love Foundry, we are creating the foundation of a posture created out of a process for mind, emotions, and physical that can be assumed by us quite easily, actually, that will allow that invisible posture. That posture will allow the invisibility of love and maybe spirit itself, if you can start with love, to come into and express in your life, and then you can be seen to be someone who has that. Not that you will see love, because you can color it any way that the angelic beings want it to be covered, depending on, there are a number of them, and their color spectrum is based on their response to love, a little different from the reflected color of the rainbow. So let's try that. Let's find out if that's a doable deal. How do you know? You don't know if you don't try. And now we have enough intellect, we have enough emotional maturity to say, okay, I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. Because I can change them. I can go from happy to sad. I can go from petting the dog to shooting the dog. It's up to me. And that requires different emotions. So I am not my emotions, but what is it that creates emotion itself? That's it, love. And if you perfect emotion to a frequency where love itself enters in and takes over the emotional space, then the emotions disappear as separate forces, and love appears as the fundamental creative force, which can create anything. It's worth having. It doesn't mean you have to use it for everything, but I want it in everything. I want it in my water. I wanted it, and if you saw the Japanese snowflakes that were built by putting love on the bottle, as opposed to hate on the bottle, which is the absence of love. If you put love on the bottle, you get beautiful snowflakes when you freeze them into a snowflake. Or what would be a snowflake? A frost flake, I guess. I don't know. But if you take the love out, you get deranged looking, insane snowflakes. That's what you get. The geometry doesn't hold together. It breaks down. And what is that? That tells you that there's a fundamental energy that creates beauty and geometric perfection, that it's invisible in the rainwater that makes snowflakes, but it works. And the only time it fails is when there's enough pollutant in the water that love can't function, that crystallizing quality is not pure enough to allow it to take on the automatic inner shape the water wants. And all snowflakes are different, so there's not one size fits all. I don't know, all snowflakes are different. I'm quite certain there are two snowflakes that, as far as any ability to measure in the world, would appear to be identical, but they're not going to be identical, are they? Because the atoms are all arranged, but they're arranged beautifully. That's why we love them. And if you go look at the architecture of snowflakes, it's pretty impressive. It tells you there's an intelligence in the universe somewhere. And we know that when we see frost. I come from Alaska, so I've seen a lot of frost. When frost is created, you see how much beauty is in it. And I've seen a lot of snowflakes. Way too many snowflakes. So carry this idea into yourself and think about beings that live, love so perfectly that they can enter a human being. There are beings, and Maitreya is perhaps one of these, who the material world is almost irrelevant to it. It's in the sense that it can pass into it and through it, and like love can pass into a human being. The Buddha in you is a fount of wisdom. Now, we think of the Buddha as some chubby guy who was never probably had an ounce of fat on him his whole life because he was a renunciate. But his consciousness is not confined to physical form, certainly not anymore. because he's given that up and he's now on a very high plane of existence. But his descent into the material world is not limited to any specific form. It is by us because we won't accept him in certain forms. We may not accept him entering into us because we don't want to be fucked up even by a Buddha. I don't want appreciation of the Christ in me. Why would I want that in me? I want me in me. Well, maybe everything you think of as you would be improved by that. And maybe it wouldn't harm your individuality to have a greater appreciation of love in yourself. So when you're taking in love, you don't have to take in any entity. You don't have to take in Jesus. You don't have to take in Maitreya. You don't have to take in Jupiter. You don't have to take in an entity, even though you're going to, because love comes in entities. Angelic entities embody love to transmit it to denser levels. And if you're going to go upward in density or inward in density, into yourself in density, you're going to find that greater beings live inside of you already. Already the universe is inside of you. And your individuality with its free will controls your human identity, but that doesn't limit it to everything because your emotions are in you and they are living. Now, in the esoteric world or in the Mahabharata world, Vishnu and Shiva and Brahman are entities. They have business and they're acting on their business, and we are the result of their business in the material world because they're shaping things. And Varuna is the name of the entity that makes up the astral plane, which is where emotions in us come from. And because Varuna, which is the astral plane of the earth, isn't surrendered to love completely through whatever reasons it isn't, maturity or inclination or whatever governs Varuna, we don't find love in the emotional body. She isn't mature enough yet for that to transmit. But as it turns out, a human being, even though you're a little isolated piece in your emotional body of Varuna's body, you have that in you. We have that. We are a miniaturization of an enormous divine being called God. And in us is every aspect, attribute, element, and ability that creative God, which happens to be a God of love, which is why it's convenient that it's inside of us, owns. And if you're going to go closer to your appreciation of you in relationship to that greater being out of which you are, you're going to need love. You're going to need its essence. You're going to need the energy that word defines when we speak it. You're going to need the creative power of life. And it was given to whatever God creates this human culture that we are a part of. It's a beautiful thing. And so I don't want to try to figure all that out. That's the Buddha's work. Let him figure it out. I want love in my creative satchel. So that whatever I speak, whatever I think, whatever I feel, whatever I do, that's an automatic aspect of my actions. Not only an automatic aspect, but not one that I just paint in like a paint by number, where I decide, oh, that homeless guy doesn't deserve love, so I'm not going to paint it into his garments, into his space. I'll just paint it into that space of that little girl over there, who may very well have been Lucretia Borgia in her last lifetime. I don't know. I don't know who anybody is. I don't know how they got there. I just know there they are. So if I paint them all with love, if I give it to everybody, if I give it to myself, for God's sake, I'm no perfect person. I was a Marine in Vietnam. What kind of perfection do you think I've got? So we have to think about love and how it creates good, so that if you do give it to that homeless person who would like to kill everyone in the neighborhood to get a hit of fentanyl, you're not going to harm him and you're not going to animate him to harm others. Love does not do that. Now, emotion can do that. Hate on that guy because he's a broken human being, and you're giving him hatred, and you're giving him the power to go out and harm someone else with it to the best of your ability that you give it to him. So love is a panacea that you can give everybody. Give it to Putin. He doesn't have to drink it, but if he does, he's going to become a better person. Loving your enemies becomes a truth worth acting on. Giving emotional energy to your enemies is not, because emotional energies, even when you call them love, because I love my enemies, that's an emotional sophomoric empowerment of your enemy. It doesn't change him one damn whit. It gives him ammunition to shoot back at you across the demilitarized zone, because you're giving him power. Emotion is power, like electricity is power. If I give more electricity, we're trying to take all the power away from Putin. We can't. Take away his money, take away his oil, take away his electricity, so that he can't wage war on his neighbor. If we take all that away from him, then his government will collapse. They'll get a new Putin who might be less inclined to wage war on Ukraine, and everybody in the world can go back to Parcheesi or whatever game they were playing. So, but if you give him emotion, you give him fuel, you give him oil and gas and power, electricity, because emotion is a powerful thing. Thought has no power in it, except the power you give it through applying emotion to it. You can build a car. That's a beautiful intellectual property. And that took the power of the machine, the power of all the things that created the hybrid Toyota. But it has to have power to run on. Now, the amazing thing about the hybrid is it generates some of its own power, but it's not power that it made out of nothing. It didn't get it out of Boulder Dam. In the plug-in call, you're getting the power from some carbon fuel down the road, or some hydroelectric fuel or atomic fuel, but you're not getting it from the ether like that car that's driving around Africa that's supposed to be able to run on its own steam. That's not here yet. Maybe someday in the future it will be, but fusion power will be an intermediate step for that, for sure. And you've got a lot of hydrogen to convert into helium. I don't know what we're going to do with all the helium-3, but maybe it'll destroy the earth in the end. I don't know. The bottom line is we need to not give power to evil, to things that are vacant of love, to things that act without love. Now, that doesn't mean that Putin has no love in him. I think he loves Russia, and he thinks that creating a greater Russia would be a greater idea than a greater Ukraine. Well, that in itself lacks a little bit of sharing and caring. You know, the Tartars that which live down on the steppes of Ukraine are not Russian. You'd have to send a whole bunch of Russians to Ukraine to live down there where Crimea is and all of that, before you would replace all of those not indigent, but indigenous people with Russians. Just as the Siberians that are being sent to the front line and being killed by cannon fodder those aren't Russians either. They're just in the Russian Republic. And some of them are getting a little tired of having all their kids killed in an effort for Russia to take over the populace of Ukraine and reshape it in its own image. How about we let them shape their own country in their own image? Well, there's arguments for and against that. But love has only one argument. Love itself. Create a better world for them. Cut a deal with them. Buy their stuff from them. What do you care if you cross over the border from France to Germany, as long as you can get a good meal? We don't have to own the restaurant. So this is the way the human race is going. And we don't want a globalist society in which a smaller group of people up in some ivory castle are telling everybody in the world what kind of marinara sauce they can serve on their spaghetti. We like the Italians cooking up their own version. I don't want the English telling the Italians how to make spaghetti sauce. I've had it in both countries. Well, I haven't actually been in Italy to have their Italian sauce. I've certainly had it in England, and it's not quite Italian unless some Italian moves to England and starts making it. It's a wonderful world if we let individuality, even in countries, flourish. Go to Ethiopian restaurants, go to Cuban restaurants. It's wonderful what people come up with. Even if you buy a McDonald's in Japan, it's Japanese. You can tell. You could tell it. It's usually better. But the point is, we don't want a ubiquitous world. You can ship cows to Japan and you think the milk's different, but it's not. It's different. You can think Jersey cows produce the same milk in Japan they do in New Jersey. They don't. Feed them Japanese grass, have Japanese caretakers. It's going to be different milk. The cow's milk in Iceland was amazingly beneficial. They didn't know that until they found out that there's no thyroid disease in the Icelanders. How is that the case? Now, we know why there's no thyroid disease in Japan, because iodine is in the kelp, and the Japanese eat kelp, and iodine going into the thyroid protects the thyroid from disease. It allows you to produce thyroxine. It allows you to be healthy and have healthy blood with an immune system. It allows for a lot of things. And most of the world doesn't have iodine in their food because they don't eat kelp. And the regular foods don't have very much iodine. There's not that much of it in the world. It's like 1/16 of the world's minerals, or so. I don't know how little iodine is. But it's a water soluble mineral. It's definitely important to human health. And when you take it out of the human body, which is what mothers do when they give birth to babies, because the babies take all the iodine out of the mother for their brain development and their thyroid development and their own development. And so women can't get rid of weight after the baby because they don't have enough iodine in their body. Their thyroid slows down. All of that stuff is true. And in Iceland, all the thyroids were small and busy and running like little computers. And what's up with that? Well, after studying it for a while, they realized they don't grow enough grass in Iceland, so they were feeding kelp to the cows, which they ate because that's all they had to eat. And kelp turns out to be a wonderful food for cows in a certain way. Not all kelp and not all cows probably, but what it was doing is it was producing a tremendous amount of iodine in the cow's milk. So the kids in Iceland drinking milk were getting so much, and not just the kids, because the cheese and the milk and all the dairy products were giving iodine to the adults and children and everybody. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, it's still the iodine that's in the kelp that's doing it. It's just going through the cows, and they're converting it to milk with iodine and other nutrients that are in the kelp. So this is how love works in the universe. It knows what things need. It knows what you need to evolve you to a perfect expression of yourself, like that black stallion. And it's going to get it to you one way or another if you are open to it, if you are open to surviving with it and for it and need it. It didn't take a doctor in Iceland to say, we need more iodine in our population, or our thyroids are going to go empty, and we're going to have cretins for children, and our civilization will end. They didn't have to figure that out, but they needed iodine, and the circumstances themselves brought it to them in their diet through the milk, through the cows. Now, whether that's a karmic law, bringing what it needs to Iceland because the Icelanders are in favor with God? I have no idea. I just know that it's love that produces the result that causes beauty and truth and love to grow in the culture of whatever that is, atoms, flowers, people, gods. So make the invisible visible. Look in yourself, into your inner world, and imagine all of that life there. It's a bunch of life. It's inside you. It's in your inner awareness. It's like, we mean they're all packed up in there? Yes, they're all inside of you. Because when you go inside of a human being, you don't go into just a cellular structure. You go into an inner universe, which has all these higher frequencies in them. Spirit is the highest frequency we can find, and it's in you. And all the ones in between, the Atmic plane, the Buddhic plane, all of these other levels and planes that we've, the mental plane, yeah, that's in there. Contact it with your senses. It's your senses that open you into that inner universe. And when you open your senses in the worlds in which love is a thing, conscious thing to the lives that live there, you're going to be hit by it. You're going to see it. You're going to be impressed by it. You're going to want it in your human form, in your emotional body, in your mental body, in your physical body. And like the iodine, you're going to start consuming that inner manna that brings it down into you by imagining it awakening in your cellular being. Because you have a pathway to a cellular being. It's called the etheric body. It's what chakras are. But they're all junked up. They're filled up with our emotion and thought and feeling and rejection of love. So they're not very clear in people. That's why gurus recommend a certain kind of purity, a certain kind of diet, a certain kind of vegetarianism, if it's a certain type, at a certain stage, I suppose that's necessary. And so all of this is a real way to live towards love that brings it into our contact and our ability to put it in our actions, in our Da Vinci painting of the Mona Lisa. We don't know how it's in there, but we know that 500 years later, we still get something from this piece of art. And most art will not be around in 500 years and won't be protected, revered, and carried on because there's something in it we get. When you look at great art from great artists, it's not because we happen to favor it and like it and value it. It's because it's in the art. It was in the artist, and the artist, through his paints or sculpture, put it into the art. Now, I don't know how much love was in Da Vinci, Michelangelo, but some way they have inner openings into a world in which subtler energies than we're normally used to can come into us and then into their art. And this could be true of a little pot that you got 500 years, made 500 years ago in Japan or somewhere else. There are artists that are just, the artists of the world are just astounding what they can bring into art. And when they have the nature of the inner invisible world as a hunger to include in their art and in their imagination, they fight their way in there and they get it and get it back. And if you're Van Gogh, you might whack off an ear trying to do it. But I don't know how he got his ear damaged. He might have gotten a bar fight. I really don't know. But they want that much. Artists want to see it and bring it in and put it in their art. And some of them want it so much that they do it. And they can do it consistently. And it shows itself to us in the beauty. It reveals itself to us. So that doesn't make them nice people or kind people. Some of them are debauched people because they are so inclusive of all the universe of things. And they value prostitutes as much as they value princesses because they're part of it. They're part of the fabric of life. And so is good scotch, and so is Bordeaux. So We don't know how it all comes about, but we do know that love is through it all, and it's in you, and you can go there and the imagine the beings that are standing there in it, of it. There is no resistance in Jesus. If you look at where he is today and what he's doing, you will see that he's a relatively radiant being in love, because he has grown up considerably in 2,000 years. Do you think? He's had a lot of experiences since then. And by the way, his commitment to humanity brings him back and back and back and back. So he's here somewhere among us. If he isn't, he will be soon. And we can't make suppositions that we would like to prove. And this is the trouble with Bibles. Bibles are books that are written some time ago. Some of them are written in stone, Coptic Bibles. You can't control the future because you put it in a book, so that 2,000 years from now, something will happen the way you want it to happen. Prophecy is a different thing. Prophecy is an actual perception of something that's going to happen far in the future, because the events are already in motion. Throw a rock off the Golden Gate Bridge, and if there's a boat down there, it's going to land on the deck of that boat, and the boat might be not even under the bridge, but moving towards the path of the rock, and the rock's falling at 125 miles an hour once it gets up to speed, and the boat may be moving at 60 miles an hour, so it's over here in the height of the bridge, and zzz, bam, and the rock is going to hit the deck of the ship, maybe punch a hole in the boat and drown everybody on it. So if you saw all of that going on, you saw somebody pushing a bowling ball off the bridge, and you saw the boat headed in the pathway, then you're seeing the future. And unless something enters in to shift the direction of the boat or catch the bowling ball, then that's going to happen. The laws of physics are going to produce a result. So a seer is a person who sees how that's going on, but way into the inner world, where Advent is in motion, that will eventually appear on Earth, maybe not for 500 years or 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 10 million years, but it will, unless redirected, appear. And in the spiritual worlds governed by love, they're not whimsy. They don't change their mind. Our solar logos, our solar system, is going to go around that zodiac and move its way through space in a plotted course. And if you're NASA and you can understand that course, you can tell where the solar system is going to be 10,000 years from now, or where it was 10,000 years ago. And that's how they figure out the age of things in the archaeological world. They see where things were, because they can extrapolate it with a computer. And with AI intelligence, we can extend that field of vision, like the Webb telescope and these telescopes in space. We can see a lot further than we used to. And that's giving us a bigger appreciation of events in motion, or events from the early days that have resulted in where we are now. So what you imagine in the world of love and pull towards your physical manifestation with a sense of directed purpose and a commitment to not deviate from it is going to happen. And if you want it to be love, Christ consciousness, you want it to be a perfect expression of harmony with divine beings, then that's what you're going to have. Take responsibility for your own future self by committing yourself to the science of love, not the rebirth of Jesus as a second coming, because that may not happen. Christ consciousness is coming into the world right now with a new revelation for humanity as it came into the world through Jesus. But he may not be the one who embodies it. But I suspect he will embody it, because he is a lover of humanity. He knows what love is. He certainly has. He has a working relationship with love. So wherever he is, if he's embodied as a human being, he will contain way more love as a natural aspect of his being than the average Joe, in terms of his conscious ability to express it. It's not going to betray him. He's going to have it. Now, but he's not necessarily in the same role. And he's not necessarily Jewish anymore either. Someone said that he's in a Syrian body somewhere in Syria right now. I don't know if that's true. I don't follow Jesus' incarnations, but his followers do. He's a master of great spiritual significance, but so are other masters. And the Bodhisattva Maitreya is someone you don't know probably, or maybe, or don't. I don't know. He's the fifth Buddha. He's the one following after Gautama Buddha. So who does that make him to us? We don't know him yet, most people. But the fact that he's been one of the beneficial contributors to the human race for millions of years will come to be realized, as was the Buddha. Now, how do we find that out? You find it out by having a relationship with the being. But there is such an office as the world teacher. The world teacher is a spiritual office, the one who's sort of at the center of that. Yeah, it's funny how you have to go backward to get better at it. I'm really not good at this, sorry. The center of that circle, right there at the center, the very center circle, is a being. Now, it might be an enormous being because its ability to reach out and touch all the other beings and all the other circles comes from that very power at the center. And because of its distance from us, its optical distance from us, we don't think it's that big. But if we were in it, we might realize that it reaches through space and encompasses an enormous area of space. And so a world teacher is a being who is the embodier of love for the entire world, at least the positive world teacher. The negative world teacher is the what? The Antichrist? I don't know. I don't ask. I don't care. I'm not trafficking in that group. So find your way into the inner world where love is the governing energy of everybody who lives there. And bring that into your active conscious expression in some way. Some way. Make a picture of it. Draw a baby picture of it. Color it in with crayons. Put it on your refrigerator. That's the world of love, and it's in me. That becomes a symbol for that for you. You can put Jesus, a plastic Jesus, on your dashboard, but don't put it on there as Jesus. Put it on there as a symbol of perfect love in your life, and that's what it will connect you to. Now, if it's plastic, you might think, oh, that's just a hollow plastic Jesus on my dashboard. It's what you give to it. It's what you make it. If you make it a link to the reality of the kingdom of love and its invisible power entering into your life, and you hold that as your imagined connection and visualization, then that's what that plastic Jesus is. And if you want it to connect you all the way through to the center of the universe of love as our solar system spins through it, it can do that too, because you can do that too. Now, you don't have to do that. You can have it connect you to Jesus, and then through Jesus to what? See, that we don't have, in the Hindu structure, we have a lot of intermediary beings. The Buddha is a being. Maitreya is a being. Jesus is a being. Disciples of all kinds of spirituality that serve love are in that whole hierarchy of beings. But most of the Western world doesn't know about all that. They're coming to know about it because they're reading books on it. They read Alice Bailey or Blavatsky or some other tomb, Mabel Collins, something else, and they gather data about it. And rather than be in internal argument about whether or not that's Aleister Crowley or whether that is the devil or whether that's some other bullshit, they just build their bridges to love through the people who are in that arena and support that structure. And when they do that, it becomes true for them. So it's okay. It's okay for us to be creative artistically and not worry about it. That's why the next great world religion, which is being created today, now around the world by people, will be a scientific religion. It isn't going to be founded on the personalities of previous people, whether it's Moses or Jesus or Maitreya or a bunch of other people. Their personalities won't matter. Their ability to hold the energies of love for us to be able to reach to and bring into ourselves as a science of being is important. And they're all scientists in it. Don't think they're not. They're good at it, or they got good at it. Because you don't get good at love without understanding something about the science of it. I have incredible reverence and respect for the people that create pure water for people to drink. And I don't mean just this stuff. That's fine. There are people who purify enough that you can go get a bottle of it. But the people who do it for municipalities, for millions of people who try to give drink, everybody goes, oh, well, I don't want the city swill. I don't want to drink Los Angeles water or Flint, Michigan water, or God help me, the water in Africa. The water in Sweden's probably pretty good. So you see, but there are people who dedicate their lives to providing drinkable water to human beings. And boy, do I admire those people. And if someone says, yeah, well, the city swill in New York isn't that good. No, it's not that good. It's got chlorine in it and maybe fluoride and maybe nematodes and maybe other stuff in the water that we'd like to get out of it. But I tell you what, they're not dropping dead all over New York from drinking the city water. And everybody can't afford these kind of bottles. I mean, my family, I drank out of garden hoses, but that was at a time when we hadn't polluted the world with thimerlaluene and all the other goddamn chemicals that we have produced out of Monsanto and DuPont and everybody else who wanted to curate plastics and create all of these fuels and catalytic converters and all the other things that are of themselves exotic chemicals that don't belong in our body, and steroids and drugs and bad food. So our purified water is really hard to come by today. In the 1950s, you could drink the garden hose. And then in the 60s, I drank the garden hose. Hell, I still drink the garden hose because I live in a place where the water system isn't poisoning people as much as all these dramatic people would like to think. No, it's not perfect. And if I have my choice, I want the purest freaking 0 point water you can get because I'm as spoiled as everybody else. So let's have some reverence for the people in the world that are trying their best to keep 8 billion people alive and somewhat healthy while we transition from a collapsing civilization. Because on the way to a civilization animated by love, which has got to come up out of the hearts of beings, out of you, imagining love into you and then out into the world. That's the only way you're going to build a civilization founded on love, is to make it real to human beings who build civilizations. You could make it real to ants and they'll build an ant civilization, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. They've got their own little network going and they just do all right. But we are more fragile than ants. We have to have a civilization that interacts and interconnects and has all of this electrical, water, fluid, piping, sewer systems. I mean, you should have more reverence maybe for the guys creating enormous sewer systems for cities than the water guys. I don't know, but they probably deserve equal respect. I have more respect for them than I probably do for all the priests of the world that run religions that are too corrupt. The religions are poisoning people worse than the water system of New York because it's intangible. We can't see what's in the water that the religions are pouring out into the mouths of their followers. If it doesn't have love in it, if it doesn't have the same love that the guy running the water system for New York has for pure water, then you're not going to be serving good quality spiritual substance to your people, and they're going to get sick. So, and each of us is a wellspring down into the earth of spiritual water. We can pull it up out of the earth and into ourselves and out into the society around us. We can each be that being. We can each be a Christ in ourselves if we want to. And if we don't want to, then humanity will fail, because that's what humanity is based on, so that the entire human group becomes eventually a manifestation of love through purpose and activity towards other beings. That's what we are. But if you don't include love, you don't build it in, you don't make it better and better, you don't make your own world thrive with it, then you're letting someone else do that for you. And in the end, it will fail. In the end, you can't have Trump fix it for you, or Biden, or any president, or King Charles, or anyone else. It has to come out of you. And then you summon those people to serve you as rulers or curators or governors or whatever they're going to be. But they're the people you want because they have reverence for pure water, good food, good sewer systems, and love. Thank you very much. I'm sorry this is as long as it was. I'll try to make it a shorter version next time. And because bringing the imagination of, I look in myself, because having done meditation for 70 years, I can look into that world and I see what they're up to, the beings that live in that. Some angelic beings, some Christed type beings. And it's magnificent and beautiful and radiant. But it's the love in them, each of them, whatever you call them, that is their gift. And they know that. That's why they're manifesting it as much as they possibly can, 24/7, for other beings to gain the gift of love from. So I don't worship any of those beings. I don't even know what worship is, to be honest with you, except maybe a good yogurt. There's a yogurt place down the road at Olympic and Westwood that I kind of worship their vanilla custard. And so I don't know. I don't know how to worship beings. I don't think worshiping beings makes a lot of sense, except that the word worship itself probably just means respecting what they're putting out enough to take it in. So there are some beings that what they're putting out, I respect enough that I'm not afraid to take it in to my innermost person. And I can drink this water because I trust it to be good enough. New York, I might back away from the kitchen slowly, or I might just give me a glass of water. I don't care if it's out of the tap. It isn't going to kill me. Maybe I can tell myself that story, and a little part of me will take a hit because it's not that good. But somebody's working on improving it every single day. I'm not sure that putting fluoride in it is an improvement, because I think they're using probably the wrong kind of fluoride salts. Even though we need fluoride in our bones and our teeth, often the wrong salt, fluoride salt, is toxic. And sometimes city chemists can't tell the difference, so they get people to vote it in. And the water guy probably knows. He's an engineer. And he says, this type of fluoride isn't going to help teeth. But if the mayor says put it in the water at a certain percentage, they're going to say, okay, put the fluoride in it. They'll figure it out over the next 20 years when they see the diseases that occur as a result of the wrong fluoride, just like you will if you put lead in the water or mercury or anything else. So we're learning all of that, and we will vote those people out of office and put people in office who will hire real chemists to figure it out, and not convince themselves because somebody came up with a theory that they should just include it in everybody's water. That's why we're drinking this stuff. We don't trust our governing ship. We do trust chemists pretty much, but we don't trust mayors of cities. No, they're influenced by politics, and they'll do things that they can't make judgments about because they're told to. It's a fucked up world, folks. In the meantime, go within, find a visualization of love. I don't care if you want a big round sunflower in there and you say, well, that's radiant with love. That's my inner vision. And I have faith that love is real in there. And I'm bringing that over into here. And I'm going to walk around with that visualization, bringing love into me until love changes that visualization to something better. And then I'll get a better and better one. And eventually, love itself will become something my senses register. And when they do, when your senses register the impact of love on them directly, now you're close to it. Now you're close to being able to just keep that going because you have everything in you to do it. You have only to want to be committed to it. Okay, this could go on forever, but I'm going to end it now. Thank you very much, and we'll continue this again. Love Foundry. Thank you. Oh, I have to push so many buttons. I'm so ignorant at this stuff.